the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with bite.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, I just cut off my intro. Oh well. We'll survive. Everybody knows who we are. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 260. One thing nearly half of people are starting to understand. Part 2. And yeah, everybody knows who we are, but we're going to introduce ourselves anyway. Just for the people who hate us and love us the most. I'm your host, Hannah Wellen, here with Nonsense Annihilator, Lauren Brooks, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, also known as Dr. Randy McCam.
My intro changes every episode.
It didn't.
No, it didn't.
I promise.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
No one else's intro changes every time.
Haven't settled on anything for sure yet, but
that's great. That's great. I wish you could give. You should give
everyone
else
a disclaimer.
You should give everyone else a different intro every time.
Oh God, I would lose track so fast.
That's Karen's job.
Yeah,
she's good at that.
But, in any case, that is the three of us. And we are back from 2 weeks ago to continue discussing the article that we were looking at back then for the Center for Male Psychology, written by Dr. John Barry, which provides some hope. Like I said before, baby steps, right? So this week we're going to continue reading that article, which is linked in the low bar. But before we get to that, we gotta do what we gotta do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And as we've talked about before, one of the biggest hurdles the men's rights movement has to get over is society's lack of compassion for men. Like that stands in the way of pretty much everything, because if you don't have compassion for men, you don't care how fathers feel about losing their children, whether boys are left behind in education, whether people are unfairly prosecuted, whether they're unfairly convicted. None of these issues will matter without that compassion. Certainly, the suicide issue becomes a non-issue, too, if you have no compassion, right? Unless you're worried about expense. You end up having to be completely mercenary to have any concern at all for men's issues under that circumstance. So how do we...
And when you break a society down in that way, it becomes easier to, not corrupt, but what is the word that I'm thinking of? Take over, basically.
Yeah. That's kind of how you end up with...
Surely, if you defeat the anti-cisgender lobby and you defeat the anti-white lobby, wait, where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this
to the lobby
is that so many of us are trying to defeat the transgender activists and trying to defeat the non-white activists. Yeah. And then once they've done that, they'll have fixed everything they need to fix, because they think they're fixing the causes of the problem when they're really only fixing the symptoms of the problem. And we here at Honey Badger Radio are here to let you know that these are just the symptoms of the problem. The causes of the problem are so ancient that you can't even contemplate these things. The idea of destroying male identity. What? How dare you? You've gone mental. You have. Yeah.
We got a long, winding tapestry to unravel. But in any case, what I wanted to point out with this intro is, how do we persuade lawmakers to defend the civil rights of people whose fellow citizens, including the lawmakers themselves, right, view as disposable? If people see men as disposable, they have no compassion for men, how do we get lawmakers to defend men's civil rights? So we have to debunk men's disposability first. And as we've gone through this article, the one thing that stands out is that a few more people are recognizing discrimination against men. And that awareness, which is slowly growing and fairly new, isn't compatible with viewing men as disposable. You can't consider somebody discriminated against if they deserve equal treatment, right? Like you can't fail, or rather, you can't consider somebody discriminated against if they don't deserve equal treatment.
Right.
Like
Equal treatment. What are you, some kind of communist? No, heavens no, Hannah. We need to give women better treatment than men, and then we will be safe from communism. LOL.
That's what they said in Russia during the revolution.
Yeah.
But this is a step in the right direction, as we're seeing in the article. It's a step down the path we need to take. So I guess the best thing to do is start reading along and see where the path goes. So, at the graph we were at before, and we talked a little bit about this graph, and pointed out there are some countries that are very, very much aware that our foray into feminism around the world has done damage to men. And then there are countries that are a little less aware. And the United States is not in the most aware part of the list. The UK isn't either. But we're in the middle, which is better than I thought we would be. So the authors of the survey commented that compared with pre-COVID, more people think things have gone far enough. In other words, we're done now. Feminism has achieved what it needs to achieve. We can stop. That's far enough, right? The fact that opinions have shifted in the past few years suggests that the gender empathy gap is not set in stone, but is, at least to some degree, changeable. Another graph, page 7 of the survey, shows differences on average across the generations. 53% of millennials and 52% of Generation Z agree with the above statement about discrimination against men. More agreement than Gen X, 46%, or baby boomers, 40%. And I'll go back to the above statement because it's been 2 weeks. 48% of participants agreed somewhat or strongly that we have gone so far in promoting women's equality, and we did talk about, the misuse of the word equality there, that we are discriminating against men. Like, you can't promote equality by discriminating against anyone.
And as memeable as it is, it's such bullshit that we keep heaping blame upon the boomers, or upon the Zoomers, or upon Gen X, or Gen Y, or Gen Z, whatever they are. Because all of the above generations have been subject to the same bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
The same gynocentric, feministic, and yes, I'm going to say feministic, even though that shouldn't be a word. Misogynistic shouldn't be a word. It should just be misogynist. But they added an extra syllable just to make it sound even worse. Misogynistic. It's even worse than misogynist. Even though misogynist
is what you say when it's yucky. So.
and yeah, I just feel like it's such a distraction to have this fight between boomers and Gen Xers and millennials and Zoomers, when, like I said, we've all been subject to the same bullshit. Mm-hmm. It doesn't do us any good to fight against each other as generations, of all things, generations, because that just pits parents against children and grandparents against children, and even if you tally it all up, great grandparents against children. Like, for fuck's sake, families are not the problem. This was the original fucking firing line of the Marxists, which has been going on since before generations were even labeled with anything. The whole idea of Marxism was to pit families against each other, to destroy the family unit, and this is why we're only playing into their bullshit by playing boomers against Gen Xers and millennials and Zoomers. Like we're all just different generations of the same thing, or whatever we feel like figuring out about these things. Like tempting though it is to call boomers a bunch of fucking cucks who caused all this in the first place. Tempting though it is to call millennials the people who brought this into fruition. Tempting though it is to call Zoomers the ultimate result of this bullshit, who are bringing it into the unspeakable future. Like, generations are not. No generation is to blame for this bullshit. Feminism is to blame for this bullshit.
Exactly.
It's been going on since the silent generation.
Right.
It's a little older than that. You have feminism that exploits gynocentrism, but there's two types of things you could call gynocentrism. And there's a lot of people that argue for the idea of natural gynocentrism, but when you look at natural gynocentrism, the discussion is about women being important because women have the babies, and women were the caregivers for the babies and had to be protected so they could protect the babies and all that. So it's really about the babies. And not so much about the women. It was just layers of protection around the baby and the capacity for reproduction. And I mean, if you kind of understand it if you hunt or you have someone in your family who hunts, especially if they hunt like deer in an area where there aren't so many deer. Like there's a shitload of deer here. I'm in Ohio, so they're like rats. But there's other critters that you hunt that you have to be more careful to preserve, them and everything. And one of the sort of cardinal rules of hunting is that you don't kill the female animals if you can tell the difference between the females and the males, which is really easy with deer. They get those big antlers, and you want the older males because they're more likely to be done reproducing, and they're also bigger and heavier. But you don't go after the younger males. You want the 30-point buck, right?
Funnily enough, you're never going to get Peter speaking out against this,
right? Well, and
saying you're all a bunch of misandrists for shooting the males.
No, for going after the 30-point buck.
As a matter of fact, you're all a bunch of misogynists for only getting eggs from the female chickens.
Yes.
How dare you do such a thing?
You have to get those male eggs. Oh, wait a minute. But in any case, the reason behind killing off the males and not the females is that a female can only have one pregnancy at a time. But if there's a shortage of males, one male can impregnate multiple females. And so that's sort of the premise behind the belief in natural male disposability and natural gynocentrism. But when you really think about that, it's not about the woman. It's not about the mother. It's about the children. It's gene-centrism. It's baby-centrism. It's carrying on the next generation centrism. And women just benefited from it by becoming important as a protector of the thing that is actually valuable, which is your ability to reproduce and carrying on to the next generation, right? So along comes, in the 12th century in Europe, among the aristocracy, in particular French aristocracy, this idea of romantic, chivalric romance, but romantic love and a gynocentric attitude, venerating women, aristocratic courting, where you don't just make an arrangement and the marriage happens, but the suitor has to win the hand of the maiden, and so on.
It's worth
They
pointing
came up
out, by
with-
the way, that romantic ideology has existed ever since Rome.
Right.
That's why it's called romantic. If Alison's listening, I expect her to pop in any time and say, "How dare you? Rome was awesome."
Well, in any case, they came up with the idea of courtly love and the idea of male sacrifice because women are just so great that they're worth it, and so on. And over the centuries, that has warped the thing that we think of as natural gynocentrism that isn't actually gynocentrism into this twisted bastardization of women's role as an important part of parenting, of family, and so on, into women just being important because vagina, because X chromosomes. Like, no other reason, nothing special about women, just, women. And all of a sudden, women deserve safety nets, and women deserve to be treated like a lady. And, you don't have to act like one, you just get to be treated like one anyway, right?
Exactly.
Like, run around like me, getting mad at people and telling them to fuck themselves sideways with a chainsaw, and still have somebody lay their coat over a puddle so that you don't get your feet wet.
Exactly. And pull your chair out, madame.
Yeah, don't do that to me, because I will fall on the floor.
This is why I'm all about ancient Greek society, because that's what it was before Romans took it over and made everyone a bunch of simps.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose that there were certain advantages that were brought about by the Romans. I'm just saying, if we can find a perfect middle ground between the Romans and the Greeks, then maybe we can advance society.
Right.
In a, dare I say, progressive. It's so ironic.
Just not the progressive that progressives mean when they say it.
Yeah, it's so ironic that society was able to progress from the dark ancient ages into the enlightened ancient ages, using societies like the Greeks and the Romans that kind of finally said, hey, maybe men are important too. Maybe men are awesome too. And maybe they brought it too far because they operated on that paradigm where they were very much in love. But at least they operated for like 1,000 years before they went under.
Yeah.
Like the society we're living in now has been operating for, well, I guess I'll leave that open to the commenters to wonder just how long our gynocentric society has been going on.
Well, the thing is, it's sort of infected a bunch of different societies. Like, we have seen it go around the world. And, for people who think, yes, but what about Islamic countries? They're gynocentric as well. And in fact, part of what contributed to the development of European gynocentrism was Arabic poetry. And if you want to know more about that, it is the front page. The description of this is the front page of gynocentrism.com. Just the introduction, it has a great deal of information. Visit the links, read the links. You'll find out what I'm talking about here. But the point in regard to the difference between the idea of natural gynocentrism, which is really not gynocentric, but gene-centric, versus the gynocentrism that we see today, which doesn't have a purpose, doesn't have an anchor, doesn't have any cause behind it, any natural cause behind it, and really developed out of a sense of entitlement among the aristocracy, Like, that gynocentrism is malleable. That can change because it was inflicted on society that was free from it before it was inflicted, right? And so it can be dismantled. It can be brought down. It can be cured. It's like a mental illness, and it can be treated, and we can, I don't know how many steps it takes to get over gynocentrism addiction. It's a little bigger than any other addiction that we have because it's a society-wide one. Maybe more than 12, but we can make those steps. So what we're reading about here is one of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't blame the boomers, you can't blame Gen X, you can't blame the millennials, you can't blame the Zoomers, but you can notice that as we go through the generations, we're seeing a little bit more and more understanding of, hey, men are getting the short end of the stick here now. This is not fair. Lauren, were you starting to talk?
Yeah, no. I mean, I was gonna say something before you moved on, but it's fine. We can just go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I honestly forgot what I was gonna say, so it's all right. Yeah, no, it's okay.
All right. Well, I was gonna say some shit about East Asia, much like you were talking about Middle Eastern Asia.
Which
and
is
you'd think East Asia would be immune from this bullshit, and it was for the longest time, because they're sort of non-theological religions, if that's even a thing. So they got them by for a long time, and for a long time they were the leaders of innovation in terms of engineering and an early form of scientific innovation, until they discovered communism. And just to be as woke as I possibly can be, they only went south as a result of the influence of Western, communism.
Yeah.
And then they had the whole women hold up half of the sky thing. It was only communism that brought the East down from the lofty heights that they had in their inventive heyday down to where they are now. And though we blame the West for feminism, perhaps quite rightly, because we did kind of popularize it, but we popularized it among the East as well, in the form of communism. And what happened to the USSR once upon a time then happened to China and various other countries around it. Sorry for the ding. That's my food. The main villain of this story is communism.
Right.
Yeah.
It's it's hard to tell if what came first, communism or feminism.
Well, feminism is a collectivism that is communist in nature, like that existed sort of pre-Marx, and feminism has always just been a collectivist, communistic exploitation of society's gynocentrism. So feminism has kind of existed alongside of the ideas that make up communism as sort of a we see your victim class, your economic victim class, and we raise you gender victim class, right?
Yeah.
And so this is like these are things that are, it's almost like taking a look at two trees that grew intertwined and developed shared roots and shared branches, and saying, asking, well, which one of these trees created the other? Well, they came from the same thing. They're the same thing. Like they're not separate. It's just that one of them focuses strictly on redistributing money to everyone, and the other one says, no, women first, ladies first, and we're all ladies, no matter what we do.
Exactly.
So, except me, I ain't no lady.
Well, I ain't no
tried.
lady.
I tried once. I was okay at it, but
that also kind of, in a sense, explains this whole transgender push, right? Because everybody's a lady. If you gotta have women are at such a minority that we have to recruit the men to become women.
Being a woman is so hard and so awful, and women are so oppressed in society that there are men who are desperate to experience it for themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, this is totally not about female privilege, right? So, going on, this survey showing a global increase in awareness of men's suffering? Could it be that the campaigning efforts of people like the Mankind Initiative have had an impact? That would be a massive achievement, not least because experience shows that just because we make people aware of men's suffering, example the fact that 75% of suicides are male, that doesn't guarantee they will sympathize. In fact, victim blaming is common, and once people start thinking men are to blame for their own problems, or that men are a privileged elite, they tend to be resistant to recognizing men's suffering. Like, that's the hardest thing with male suicide, too, because you start talking about this, and some idiot feminist comes in and starts talking about toxic masculinity, and the first thing that you hear, men won't talk about their problems.
Right. And it's such...
But if they do, what happens?
Right, they get chastised, they get criticized, they get ridiculed for doing it. And so I think that this increase in awareness is really, I think it can be boiled down due to the existence of the internet, right? And because we're able to talk to people in other countries, and the things that are happening in their, like, let's say in India with their ridiculous, I forget what the laws are that
the
were
dowry law.
Right, exactly. But yeah, if it wasn't for the internet, there wouldn't be this international, like, discussion about what's happening, and we can connect, we can compare and contrast what's going on. And even if it's just, hey, someone who has immigrated to America from India is interested in looking for, or interested in finding that news, they they get it and they spread it, and it's like, well, okay, well, I'm here in India, this is what's happening over in my country. People start to listen, they start to hear, and that's how things happen. And that's why, like, what we do when we talk about these things, it's people like to dismiss it as, oh, you're just talking, oh, we're still talking about feminism and blah blah blah. Well, no, it's not just talking about feminism, it's talking about advocacy in legal areas where people are actually suffering across the globe, and that, I think, is invaluable.
Yeah.
So
thank God for the internet, because in the 90s, not that anyone talked about politics in the 90s, but if and when they did, people in the West would be saying, oh man, India is so misogynistic.
Yeah.
And in India, they'd be saying, oh man, the West is so misogynistic. Every country in the world, having no point of reference other than the television and the newspapers, would carry on saying, oh man, all the other countries in the world are so misogynistic, but we're not. So we need to improve. We need to be better than them. And every country in the world will be doing this. And this is what happened from the 60s right up until the 90s, actually long before the 60s. I mean, feminism has been going on for, it's hard to tell when it started, but it didn't start in the 60s. It started in Europe and America in the 1910s.
What we recognize as feminism today traces back to about the mid 1800s. There were writings that everything that we look at today was based on, and when the suffragettes created their writings, their work, and the ones in the UK started engaging in terroristic acts, and the ones in the US wrote a mockery of the Declaration of Independence called the Declaration of Sentiments. They were based on those earlier writings, which were very hateful toward men. Like feminism, its entire basis, its foundation, the writings on which every feminist practices today, whether you're a gender feminist or a choice feminist or a communist feminist or a thumb up your ass feminist, otherwise known as a Twitter feminist, like your shit, everything that you do traces back to feminist writers from the 19th century who wrote about how terrible men were and how oppressed women were by just the fact of men being in positions of responsibility in society, and women not being in positions of responsibility in society. That's it. And that's patriarchy theory in a nutshell. And these women, these feminists, presumed that this status in society was created by men against women's will and inflicted on women from the outside, completely out of women's control. And it was the only thing keeping women down, and women's position they considered to be down. And that was that, right? That's where the crazy conspiracy theory, known as patriarchy theory, was born. So feminism is a couple hundred years old, unfortunately. But the attitudes behind it go back to that old, gynocentric aristocracy in the 12th century Europe. So, like, it's all rooted in entitlement and anger. But I guess that's why feminists tend to do this thing where, guy complains, I have never been in a relationship. I'm 30 years old. I've never been in a relationship. Nobody loves me. Nobody wants to be around me. I'm despondent and melancholy and lonely and sad, and I think I'm just gonna end it all. And he's been told, right, you should talk about your problems. You should talk about your feelings. Well, instead of looking into, gosh, it's really hard to be lonely like that. Gosh, it's really hard to be rejected and treated as a social outcast. What can be done for this person to help him connect with the rest of society and connect with a support network of friends and family, and maybe find a partner in his life.
It's much
that,
like
instead of doing that, you get, how dare you presume women to be the prize that you deserve because you were a good boy. You have no right to feel that way. You're not allowed. Shame on you. So why on earth would a guy tell you his feelings? Why would he talk about his problems? Right? Why is he going to hand you his vulnerability when you are going to turn around and just scour it with a Brillo pad? When you're going to punish him for it instead of helping him?
It's much like how criminals work, how thieves work, how burglars work. They're not going to rob the expensive households because they're going to assume by default that they're going to have some kind of security system involved. Burglars who know what they're doing will burgle the places that don't have these defenses. They'll burgle the most vulnerable places. I mean, I think I've got that across with that simple description.
Mm-hmm. So it's why, contrary to, intuition of a normie, you're more likely to get robbed if you're poor than if you're rich, because if you're rich, you can afford a security system. Even if you're middle class, you can afford a dog, right? But if you're really poor, you might not even be able to get a bank account. You might have all of your cash in the house.
Right.
Therefore, you're more likely to get burglarized. It's easier to break into your place. You might be miserable and have drugs in your house to deal with it. You might be on Medicaid and have all kinds of medications because once they find out you're on Medicaid, doctors just start throwing all kinds of things at you. Psychiatric drugs, anti-inflammatories, whatever they can prescribe. Oh my gosh. Like, oh, well, we can treat this. We have about 50 million magic pills you should be taking every day.
Oh, God.
Because we're not going to suggest therapy because you're not going to be able to pay for that. But you can take all the drugs you want, That's and of course, they can be stolen and resold. So, of course, if you're poor, you're more likely to get robbed. And if you don't have society's compassion, if society doesn't give a rat's ass about you, you're more likely to be abused. Women feel like they're vulnerable. Women feel like they're weak. Women feel like they're in danger and they're exposed and they're targeted and all these other things because that's what feminists tell them. But the overwhelming majority of victims of violent crime are men. The overwhelming majority of completed suicides are men. The overwhelming majority of homeless who don't get to stay in a shelter, the ones that live under a bridge or in a tent on the street, men. And when they want to talk about those problems, when they want to talk about what they're experiencing, what do we hear? Well, the overwhelming majority of perpetrators are men. That makes it the victim's fault because he shares a gender with them?
Exactly. And then what you also hear is, the number of homeless women is rising. Oh my God, it's a crisis, guys.
Yeah, or the allegation that the reason guys can't get into shelters is because they're all drunks. Which it's actually exactly the opposite. The reason so many homeless men are drunk is because they can't get into a shelter and they don't want to feel the exposure to the elements that they are experiencing.
Yeah.
Right? And it is just nonstop, I'm sad because my wife won't let me see my kids. Well, how dare you harass her over your children? You're supposed to be out of her life. She divorced you. Those are her kids, not yours. Right? That is what guys hear. Why the fuck would they want to talk to feminists about their problems? Why would they want to talk to feminist-trained therapists? Right?
Because they get all their information from CNN.
Yeah.
And the like, or whatever your localized equivalent of CNN is. And they're like, well, everything is my fault. I should keep capitulating to the very same thing that made me homeless.
Well, they do if they live in an airport.
Yeah. Or what they do if they have, internet access, is they go find the people online who are talking about these things, and then the media goes behind behind them and says, well, look at all these misogynists, they're gathering in this one place. Oh my God, look at all these far right incel miscreants, right? It's just the dregs of society. They're going underground. They're getting more. It's a terrorist cell.
Oh yes,
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
the
But
terrorism of words. Right?
Yeah.
You have to be careful. If you blow up the internet, you might die, but it's okay because in the afterlife you get 72 genders.
Yeah.
Like 8 years ago, the phenomenon of MGTOW was on the radar of these militant feminists, but you'll notice it dropped off since then, and now all they're talking about is incels. If they want to insult you, they don't call you a MGTOW, they call you an incel.
Mm-hmm.
What does that say to you, folks?
Yeah.
I'm tempted to just leave that question open and let the commenters say exactly why is that the case, that these feminists just let the phenomenon of MGTOW drop off their radar so that they could call everyone who disagrees with them an incel.
Yeah,
I could explain it for you right here or now, but I'm going to leave it open as like a chess puzzle for you to figure out for you to go on, Anna.
I have a very dark take on this. All right, so in terrorist organizations, actual terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al Qaeda and those, right? They exploit their society's incels. They don't necessarily call themselves that, but men who just have no chance of marrying and raising a family, which is incels. And those are the guys that they convince. They take them into some beautiful garden somewhere, in an oasis, and give them hashish and tell them this great story about, what it's going to be like in the afterlife, and they'll get their 72 virgins and blah blah blah. Convince them to strap a bomb on their chest and go into somebody's wedding and blow themselves up and kill as many people as possible. That is how they recruit. And they're looking for people who are already depressed, who've already lost hope, who feel like they have nothing left to live for. And the difference between that society and our society, the thing that pisses feminists off about incels in Western society, is they're not obedient little automatons that will take those kind of orders, those kind of marching orders. They're a little bit more savvy. They haven't been indoctrinated with a religious outlook that makes them believe that they can be chosen and obligated to die for a cause. That is why feminists are angry with them. Because if they could be treated that way by our feminist, gynocentrist-run establishment, there would be an incel military force run by the government. They would exploit the fuck out of you until you died. And then they would use you to death, and then they would use your dead body against the enemy. Like, that is what that establishment does. And that is why incels are under attack. And should remain independent. Because you do have something left to lose. You have your individuality. You have your independence. You have your autonomy. You have your humanity. Those things should not be taken away from you. Right. Nobody has the right to take those things away from you.
And it's worth pointing out that as far as the powers that be are concerned, they don't see any difference between an incel and a cell, as in an involuntarily celibate and a voluntarily celibate. Like a man who lives his life without any capitulation to the holy touch of a woman. A lot of you in our audience will have encountered this whenever you attempt to present an argument against a feminist, and you're presented with a counter argument. Well, you're only saying that because you haven't had the goodly, holy, celestial touch of a woman, therefore you're wrong. Most of us have encountered this, even 10 years ago, before we got as far as we are right now. And that's what all this comes down to. Well, despite all of these tertiary symptoms that have been dragged on top of this, the fucking racism and the transsexualism and the whateverism, all of this grew from the idea that men cannot exist without women, which has been in the localized zeitgeist since 100 years ago. Men cannot exist without women. The identity of a man cannot exist without the identity of a woman. And that's why, by the way, this trans shit exists right now. Because of this, because of this destruction of male identity. Because men can't exist without women. And it's all apparent in this incel bullshit. This is why they will call you an incel the moment you present any opposition to this feminist totalitarianism. I'm not going to mince my words at all. It's feminist totalitarianism, and all the shit we're seeing in this century is because of this feminist totalitarianism. Because men and masculinity represent freedom, and women and feminism and femininity, and yes, feminism represent protection. And we've got this far because of this, because of prioritizing protection over freedom, and which is represented because masculinity, in terms of the human condition, masculinity is freedom and femininity is protection. I'm sorry if that's reductive, but that does seem to be the way our particular species works. It's kind of the way our particular kingdom works.
Yep.
And we're so deep into this bullshit that it's hard to turn back from where we are. Like I've often said, we've had democracy for so long that it's hard to even imagine life without it. We've had school systems for so long that it's hard to imagine life without it. We've had gynocentrism for at least 1,000 years, which is why it's so interminably difficult to imagine life without it, which is why we at Honey Badger Radio are facing such an uphill battle. But we're trying. For the love of every god that's ever existed, we're trying. And I don't know what's going to happen, but at least we tried.
Well, starting to figure out that the men are facing discrimination, that men are suffering, and that we've hit a point where they can say they feel that feminism has gone too far. Like, that's a first step. Eventually, you're going to see more and more people looking into feminism and going, it was too far from the beginning, because it was off on a tangent instead of forward. Like, the tangent was this lie about female oppression and male oppressor status, And going forward would have been, equality of accountability, and seeking equality of freedoms and rights to go with that accountability, without trying to trap men in a gender role that maintains obligation to women for women's benefit, without any benefit to men, and without any reciprocal responsibilities for women. But what did feminism do? They tried to free women from all of their obligations, all of their restrictions, all of their everything, that they felt was just too hard to deal with. But they wanted to preserve all of the obligations that men had under coverture.
Exactly.
Right? And those obligations were the reason that women had those restrictions. If somebody is financially responsible for you, and they have to pay your taxes, and they have to support your children, and they have to make sure that you are fed and clothed and have a roof over your head and all that stuff, and part of your living expenses come out of your own property. Like, if they're responsible for managing your wealth, then they have to have the right to override you. When you say, well, I want to use it this way, they have the right to tell you no. If you don't want that, be responsible for yourself. Women don't like that.
So, as much as I am willing to work with Christians, because I recognize that we have a common enemy in this modern Marxist Gnostic religion, and as much as we have a common enemy in Islam, because as much as I'm about to say about Christianity is not as bad as Islam in any way. The problem with Islam is that it's so gynocentric that we in the Christian Empire, and I'm going to call it the Christian Empire, can't even recognize that it's even more gynocentric than we are. But I have to point out to my Christian brothers in Christ that this all came about. Well, not all of it. I mean, but the Christian mindset has not been opposed to this gynocentric ideology. It's kind of been instrumental to it. Because even though it has a male god, actually, kind of because it has a male god that raped a human female, and that introduced this whole idea that the enlightenment of this religion was brought about by a male god raping a female human, and therefore every man should identify with God and every woman should identify with a human. It judges women by the standards of a human, and it judges men by the standards of a god. Do you see how that might have been, like I'm saying, instrumental to how we got here in the first place? And yes, I'm aware that so much of European and subsequently American society was built upon this paradigm of man should be treated to the standards of a god, and woman should be treated to the standards of a woman. Right, we've got quite far. We've gone a long way on this paradigm, and well done for reforming the religion. That's what religions should do. They should reform themselves in order to keep, dare I say, progressing to the point where we can improve we can improve the nature of human existence, where we can improve how we all live. I'm not going to say we should go back to how we lived 2,000 years ago. Whatever ideology we've existed under in the last 2,000 years has clearly improved our lives, has clearly improved well-being of our particular situation. But at some point, we have to say, okay, we've done well, but when do we pull this shit back?
Yeah.
And say we've done well enough.
How much is too much?
So before we go on, I'm gonna address one thing. As I think the only Christian on the show, atheists never get Christianity right. Like, they'll make proclamations about the stories of Christianity and the tenets of Christianity and the beliefs of Christianity, based on a, let me put it this way, the most oversensitive interpretation of biblical verse possible. But nowhere in the Bible does it say, does it classify the conception of Jesus as a rape. Nor is it described in a way that, if you're not a feminist, is fitting of describing it as a rape. Like, now, if you're a feminist, you might call it that because of the power dynamic, right? You might say, well, Mary can't consent because God is a god. But I call bullshit. God gave humans free will in all things. So, yes, Senior Sticks, I am a Christian. And probably not normal by your perception of Christian standards. So I don't go sit in church and stuff like that. But I do practice the religion. So looking at the chat, I'm like seeing questions and everything. But I don't know if they're directed at me.
I'm not singling out Christianity in this way.
It's not about Christianity being singled out. It's about that particular myth that gets batted around specifically by atheists.
A great deal of religions are based on a prophet who was not born of a woman in the normal way.
Right, I mean, but the thing is, it's not intellectually honest unless, like I said, you believe in the standards of feminism, and if you're a practicing feminist and you think of rape as something that can happen without being against the will of the alleged victim, then you'd be justified in making up that idea and applying it. It really wouldn't apply for people who are believers, because we weren't going to think of God that way, and we're not going to think of Mary that way. And different denominations are going to have different attitudes about it as well. Like, I think Catholics would probably get even more pissed off than most people, or at least more offended by the idea than most people, because it was the other way around with Catholics. The act actually made Mary holy, made her a saint. Whereas I with most Protestants, she was blessed, but not special beyond that. Like, we don't pray to her, we don't hold her up above humans, and so it's a different story there. And it's hard to I think it's hard to explain a lot of things like this to non-Christians, and in particular to atheists, because atheists are sort of predisposed to interpret the Bible in the most uncharitable way possible, and in the most rigid way possible as well. And it kind of makes for a lack of discussion there. But God isn't necessarily male either. God's referred to as he in the Bible, and using male terms. But there's also a verse that says, in heaven they are neither male nor female. So male is used because it's something that humans understand, not necessarily because it's something that's true about God. But in that human understanding, we certainly don't want to take God and make God, with being the ultimate representation of personal agency, the ultimate false allegation recipient. Right? That just would be, I just can't sit back and let that happen. So, I mean, your point about the gynocentrism, like Christianity is gynocentric. It's gynocentric originally in the same way that gene-centric and child-centric societies are gynocentric. But over the centuries, churches have evolved it to a point where it's gynocentric in a different way, and it's partly because all of the social stuff in the churches is run by women. All of the maintenance of the social fabric of the church is done by women. Like, you have, deacons and pastors and like the board that runs the church and everything, and that does the finances and does the rule setting and stuff like that. But if there's going to be an activity that the parishioners are going to show up and engage in and have a potluck dinner and sit down and eat together and all, the women do that. It's always the women. And it's always, the church mothers, the church aunts, the church grandmothers. So everything in the church is female-centric because of that. And I think that's been that way since probably the very beginning. When it was the women that first told the story.
To some degree, that's my point. No, dare I say, no religion is without sin. Let he who or she who is without sin cast the first stone.
But what that does is it makes religion just like society is without religion. So if you look at your local school system, for instance, if there's going to be a fundraiser for the school where there's a bake sale or, a raffle or a battle of the bands or anything like that, you know who organizes it? The PTA, Parent-Teacher Association. You know who most of the people are in the Parent-Teacher Association? Moms and female teachers. So it's the women. The women organize the social stuff. And if you want some place to lay the blame for warping gynocentrism from gene-centrism and child-centrism, in which women had an important role because of the capability of reproduction and nurturing and so on, into just venerating women because vagina and X chromosomes, and giving women privileges over men, and discriminating against men on behalf of women for no reason other than gender. The blame for that lays squarely on the social organizers, the arbiters of the rules of society, the arbiters of the rules of politeness, the arbiters of the rules of how to keep your family happy. She who wrote "Happy Wife, Happy Life," right? That's where the blame is. It's not on the creators of deity-based faith. It's on the creators of gender-based faith. Like, religion has its benefits and its drawbacks, but everything about it comes from human behavior. Just regular, everyday human behavior. It's just human behavior that's in a special box for special reasons. But it's the same human behavior you see in a school system, or in a city council meeting, or at a bicentennial event for your community, or at the county fair and the 4-H club activities. in the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, every place. In your government. Right? And unfortunately, there isn't something else we can get rid of or reform in order to get rid of gynocentrism. It, in and of itself, has to be attacked. And it seems to be working.
This is why we at Honey Badger Radio exist, to remind every ideology, everything from the most ancient of religions to the most modern of ideologies, to bear in mind that you can't just keep adhering to the gynocentrism of human nature. Because if you do, then we're just going to keep tumbling down the same bottomless pit.
Yeah. And honestly, when an organization starts out and it's neutral, and then it gets infected with gynocentrism, it becomes corrupt. And every corruption that has taken place, what's that movie? Advocate, or The Advocate, maybe, where the devil keeps saying, vanity is my favorite sin. Well,
Devil's Advocate, yeah.
Yeah, Devil's Advocate, there we go. Vanity is about one thing, right? It's about viewing yourself in a way where you think other people will view you well. And most vanity in men is about viewing themselves in a way that they'll be the hero. They'll be admired by women. Right? Mm-hmm. And even gay men do this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even gay men seek praise from women. Very rarely do I meet
kind
one
of
that
especially, weirdly enough.
Well, there are gay men that are, women will call them misogynist, but they're really just indifferent. To a lot of women, just indifference is misogyny, because you're not venerating them, you're not worshiping them, right? But yeah, there are a lot of gay men even that seek female praise, seek female companionship and everything. And, their vanity might be divided. Like, if they're vain, their vanity might be divided between that and seeking a partner, which they're not going to seek from anyone feminine, right? But straight men, their vanity is all about women. Completely. Like, even being admired by other men can be just something to show off for women if they're not careful. And that pretty much is the inroad for corruption in all things, right? Your vanity or arrogance, all other things trace back to it. Greed traces back to it. Even in some ways, lust traces back to it. But it's still a gynocentric behavior. Not that men have to be that way. Not that women have to be that way. But I think it is that way. And, so if you look at the ways in which various churches have been corrupt, in the last 100 years, where you've seen these mega churches that collect tons of money for, I'm speaking locally here, tons of money for the benefit of the poor in their community, and then build a giant Jesus statue that gets struck by lightning and burned to the ground, and then they build another one because that's not message enough for them.
Jesus Christ.
Yes, actually.
Twice.
Yes. Well, they replaced Touchdown Jesus with Buddy Jesus, so it's all right.
He has risen.
Yeah. It's just so, yeah. But and a lot of that, like that vanity that comes back to wanting to be looked at and admired by women. And goes right around to who are the organizers of the church? ladies.
Mm-hmm.
And who has to show off the most? with jewelry and hats and knickknacks and pretty shoes and all that, and a giant Jesus statue. Women.
And nobody does it better than Black women. Oh, well, Lord, you want to see? I don't look.
That is true. They definitely got more style.
Man, they get all dressed up, and it's like it's amazing to see. Really, honestly,
Yeah.
That's real style.
If white girls get dressed to the 9s, black girls get dressed to the 81s.
Yeah.
I think white women and black women could give each other a run for their money, as could East Asian women and South Asian women and Middle Eastern women. I mean, I don't want to draw a differentiation. There seems to be something familiar to every culture about women being the ones who are very interested in iconography. And so I guess it's ironic that men are the ones who actually sculpt the iconography.
Yeah.
And we look back at all this shit going, well, men are the ones who sculpt the iconography, so men must have been the ones who led the iconography. But no, they were doing it because women wanted them to. Yeah. And this is what's so difficult for any given culture to understand. That yes, it's men who do everything, but it's not just because other men told them to. It's because other men and other women told them to. And if only we could get this across, we could build a civilization. Dare I say an ideology? Dare I even say a religion that can acknowledge the importance of men and women. And I'm struggling to think of a successful religion in the last 4,000 years that has, well, I guess the successful ones must have laid some kind of importance at the existence of men. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so successful over the millennia. It's only in the last 100 years or so, because we've been so successful because of the developments of technology and the developments of economics, that we've been so able to be so, like, we can do whatever we want because we're already so rich. And this is how it works. We do whatever works biologically for thousands of years until we're so successful to the point where we can go beyond biology and we can do whatever works technologically.
Yes.
And we just assume we can keep doing that forever. And we have no sense of what happened in the past, because there aren't many relics of the past that can warn us about what happens to a fundamentally gynocentric society. I mean, I guess there's the Adam and Eve story. I guess that's the entire point of the Adam and Eve story. That this was ancient technology. This was ancient civilizations telling us, do beware of what the fuck can happen if you let women let your
fucking women get out of control
and tempt men with all the the temptations of what can happen. Yeah.
If you really go back to the old religion, it's the Adam and Lilith and Adam and Eve story. Because remember, Lilith was disobedient. She was not a partner to Adam. She ran off and became the mother of demons.
Man, this is like the greatest book I've never read.
You have Lilith, and then along comes Eve, and Eve seems like she's gonna be better, and then like, there was one rule in the whole Garden of Eden. Like, they had it made. All they had to do was just leave that one tree alone. Just that one thing. Everything else was theirs. Could do anything they wanted to. And boom, she had to touch it.
Why you can't give women options?
It's like Dee Dee in Dexter's Laboratory. Ooh, what does this button do?
Right.
This button brings out the little brother who's gonna strangle you. But yeah, so that's basically like the history of women in a nutshell, or an apple seed. But in any case, the point is, like, the target is gynocentrism. It has always been gynocentrism, and it will always be gynocentrism. And when you look at everything else, male disposability, the accountability gap, you cannot cure these things without reforming that attitude. Everybody's talking about Buddy Jesus in the chat. Yeah, I know, it was a horrible DD impression, but I'm not a little blonde girl. I'm a 50-year-old salt and pepper graying old grandma. So what do you expect? But yeah, if you want to know what I'm talking about after the show, if you're not participating in the after show, or if you are after the after show, get on YouTube and look up Big Butter Jesus by Haywood Banks. And it's this church is in between Cincinnati and Dayton, so it's local to me. Like, I've driven past it numerous times, and I drove past the creepy frame of the burnt out original Jesus statue after lightning struck it, and there were just people stopped along the highway taking pictures. So there you go. But in any case, back to the gynocentrism thing, I think what we're seeing is people are starting to become aware of it, but they don't want to name it. So what they're talking about is, like, hey, there are a lot of ways that men have it rough. Hey, we've stretched this so far, this feminism thing so far, that now we are discriminating against men. Well, it's gone too far. They may not understand that that was the goal with feminism all along, that feminism wasn't about equality. It was just about elevating women above men. It was just about gaining women rights and freedoms without the same responsibilities or accountability as men. So there you go. And we're seeing that in this recognition, and sympathy that is starting to come out. So going on with the article, so how would you know? Well, I'm going to read this quote. I know this is probably somewhere later in the article. This OECD research identifies gender inequality, but only when it goes against women. So that's because they literally don't measure the inequalities that go against men. That's normal in feminist research. That's how they avoid admitting that women are not really oppressed in comparison to men. So how would you know if you were discriminating against men? Actually, this is a lot harder to answer than you might think. Cognitive biases like gamma bias tend to be not to be recognized by the people who have them. But it is not just a question of unconscious bias. There is also the institutional bias, especially in those organizations which claim to be promoting gender equality. For example, and that's our quote, this OECD research identifies gender inequality, but only when it goes against women. Doesn't measure the inequalities that go against men. If they measured inequality against men, they would find that men too suffer gender inequalities, especially in countries characterized by medium and high levels of human development. They would notice fathers and families for sure.
Yeah, I just imagine the level of just unawareness that you have to believe that men go through absolutely nothing, and that it's only women who are ever affected by anything that ever happens in this world. Men, they're fine. They're perfectly fine. They created this whole thing after all.
Yeah.
It's they're they're pushing it's roses and daisies. It's the land of fucking milk for men, right? No, that's not in any way, shape, or form reality. But that's what women, feminists, that's what they want women to believe that men have, so that they can try to shoot for the stars and attain all these goals. And really, it does nothing but try to keep those people in business, right? Because they have to keep pushing this narrative and keeping men down in order to make these women believe that they I owe something to these women who are standing up for me, because obviously I'm oppressed, so let me donate to their charities. It's
Let me
sickening.
defend them on Twitter without any
Right,
knowledge of their history or their actual dogma.
right, because it's the sisterhood
Yeah.
after all. But there's no such fucking thing. But
Well,
hey,
and the thing is, like, this is feminism has a history of this. Feminist research on domestic violence doesn't gather info on female perpetration or male experiences. Or if they do take surveys or look at crime data, they change their definitions and their other standards in their research paper, their reporting, to exclude those. Or they just don't report on them. Like they gather the data, but they just don't include it in the report. So they have like three different ways, and this is like Murray Strauss wrote about this. He wrote he did quite a bit of research into this, studied feminist research, and wrote about this. And actually, Tom Golden on his website has an article about biases in feminist research, how Murray Strauss's work exposed biases in feminist research. So there's different sources you can look at to understand this. They did the same thing with sexual violence. Mary P. Koss created a survey method that is used as the primary method for feminist researchers to survey people on their experiences of sexual violence, so they get answers that didn't just come from crime data. They want a higher rape statistic than crime data gives them. And in order to avoid getting data on male experiences, they defined rape to exclude female perpetration against male victims specifically. And so again, you're looking at, like, this is not an accident. This is deliberate. And like, her only excuse was that she felt that it was inappropriate to call a man's experience of being raped rape. Like, that's it. That was all the explanation you get. They do the same thing with everything. If they're going to research poverty, if they're going to research crime data, if they're going to research anything that they consider to be a disadvantage, they'll just create definitions or set up standards within their research to completely exclude men's experiences. Or again, if they get men's experiences as part of the research, they just don't report on those. They just ignore them. And that's how they prevent discussion of men's experiences. So then you don't know that men have been discriminated against. You don't know what's going on with them.
right. And it extends far beyond just men's experiences. This delves deep into the whole racial divide that they're trying to push on everyone.
Yeah.
And oh my God, try to convince someone who is just complete or just has it in their mind that, Trump is a racist. Just try to talk to them rationally about anything that includes his name. It's just like you can't get through to these people. They have been completely convinced that whatever he did, he's a racist, right? And that just invalidates anything that he's ever done in his life. And it's just that the reduction of a person's value and contribution to society just to try to justify some perceived slight in your life, it's only contributing to the denigration of society, because we cannot move forward if we cannot have these conversations. If people are just, like I said before, terminally offended, they're just offended by everything. They don't want to have they can't think critically. And that's what's happening. That is what has happened to our society. We no longer, certain people no longer possess the ability to think critically, because as soon as you switch that racist flip, that as soon as that's it. Every critical thinking cell in your body just leaves. It's shut off. Oh my, well, I don't like it. Well, what has he ever done for you?
And this is why. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
This is why we were so much better off when we got most of our moral teachings from the church. And I know that's going to piss off a lot of our atheist friends, but when people got most of their moral teachings from the large stone building they went to once every Sunday, you can't centralize those kind of teachings as much as the Pope might try to. I mean, the Pope only controls Catholic churches, and this is, I guess, one of the good things about balkanizing various denominations of religion. But when people lose touch with the religion they get from churches, and they get all their information from the television, guess what happens? Because we are now living in an age where the vast majority of boomers, and not just boomers, but a great deal of, dare I say, normies. I don't want to use that term, but you know what I mean. The vast majority of people get all their information from the television, and not just moral information, but what they think is factual information from the television. And we're at this point where the boomers, and by that I mean the parents of most of the people listening to this stream, and most of the people who breathed life into most of the people listening to this stream, they've been listening to what the TV tells them, and what the newspapers tell them, and what the radio tells them, like pretty much every day for the last 40 years. Like, compare that with someone who goes to the church once a Sunday for 40 years. Like, that's nothing. People who go to church once a Sunday for 40 years will kind of sit there going, yeah, okay, blah. I guess that makes sense. But people who've been sat there in their own front rooms, in their own living rooms, in their own lounges, watching these people talk to them, just assuming by default that they must be told the truth. And they're just like, oh yeah, that must be true. Yeah, we need to wear a mask. We need to get 6 fucking experimental injections and so on. And they just go along with it. They're just, yeah, this must be true. This is so much worse than any of the religions that we've encountered in the last 1,000 years, in the last 10,000 years. Like, I don't want to shit on the medium of television, because, like so many people, I lived off it for the first 20 years of my life. But
television has its place, right?
It does, and I'm not going to call it brainwashing, because anything that you can simply switch off is not brainwashing. But the people on the television are telling you the internet is brainwashing you, which is absolute bollocks, because the internet is a medium of communication. Like I've said, it's like the telephone. Like, you can hear false information from the telephone, and you can hear true information from the telephone. But the people on the television are constantly telling you everything you hear on the internet is wrong. It must be. And I'm like, that's like telling us that everything on the telephone is wrong. Like, it surely depends on who you're hearing it from. And we're in a similar point in history, as I can only assume it happened when the printing press was invented, where the scribes were telling you that no, you can't trust anything you hear from the printing press, because anyone can write anything on a printing press. Anyone. You should keep listening to us and what we keep scribing on these books, because we would never lie to you.
Yeah. Well, and that's always going to be that way. There's always going to be people that try to gatekeep information, and people who try to set themselves up as superior judges of information that everybody else should listen to. And they're always going to be full of shit. But yeah, and what we're seeing is that last sentence kind of stuck with me. If they measured inequality against men, they would find that men too suffer gender inequalities, especially in countries characterized by medium and high levels of human development. Like, we're talking, like Western society. It's kind of a tough thing to call it Western society, because now it's in a much larger part of the world, much wider area of the world, but having nuclear medicine, having the ability to put a transportation device in outer space, having the ability to park something in orbit and have it stay in orbit and not fall back to the planet, having the ability to look at things on the other side of the sun, having the ability to send things out into space, to send information back to the Earth about things in space. Like, we're pretty advanced. We've got pretty high levels of human development. And in nations where those things are happening, like the United States, 75% of homeless are men, and 95% of unsheltered homeless are men. It's men that did the heavy work, the building, the construction, like engineering is what I'm thinking of, for that got us to those places, that got us to those capabilities, right? Like, women were involved. Women did mathematics. Women did programming. But it's men who went into outer space until going into outer space became routine. And I'm not going to call it safe, because you're still going into outer space, right? But in comparison to the level of unknown and the level of danger that existed in the 60s, going into outer space is pretty routine now for astronauts. It's routine as it can be, in the way that, like, modern medicine has made neurosurgery, some aspects of neurosurgery routine, and heart surgery routine. Now women are doing it, right?
I'm glad Elon Musk is on the fringes of getting people to Mars, Because if NASA was in charge of it, given that NASA is a government agency.
Yeah, the first mission to Mars would have to be all women.
Yeah, and they would all die, and then we'd be like, oh, we should never send people to Mars again. Because look what happened when we sent a crew of women there, and they all died.
Yeah, not that Musk has not sent women into space, and he's done the all-woman thing, if I remember right. But again, like it's not that it's not impressive. Like, I couldn't be an astronaut, but it's not as impressive as what the first men in space did. And then it's not to detract from their discipline and their courage and everything, but it would be unfair to the men who pioneered space travel to treat it as though what these women are doing is just as scary, because it's not, and that's fine. And it's not, I'm not saying that we should do things necessarily differently, right? That women have to be on the forefront of all these dangerous things, that it's required or anything. But when we act like I'm sick of hearing about the first woman to do something that men have been doing for decades or longer. Right? I'm sick of hearing, oh, we got it. This is a new step forward. It's progress. We have an all-female mission. That doesn't tell you anything about the organization other than that it has become significantly safer to do than it was back in the day when discrimination supposedly kept women out. Discrimination didn't keep women out. The men that qualified for that qualified because they were test pilots. Women weren't doing that. So they didn't have women to choose from, right? So I'm not, I'm not saying that women shouldn't do these things, and I'm not saying that it's, good or bad. It's just, stop pretending it's something it's not.
Well, right? And I think for me, the thing is like, all right, so we're talking about astronauts, right? Okay, so you get to fly the ship that all of these other great men and women behind you, they actually had to build the freaking thing, okay? So why are we taking away from what they did just because you have a bunch of uteruses that then occupy that spaceship that was built with every safety precaution in mind, double, triple, quadruple checked, right? At no expense spared, none, right? To protect their safety. But all of the glory goes to the people that actually, and I understand why, right? You're risking your life going up into space because anything can happen, that machinery can fail, but God, it's just so ridiculous just to reduce it down. Oh my God, there's women in space. Oh, woo. Well, we had monkeys there too, okay? Do we fucking celebrate that? I mean, I guess, no, it was a news story, but, it kind of went away. Like, we kind of realized.
Character in the tick.
I'm going to pose this question to the chat, and I'm only going to give you a few seconds because someone in the chat is going to get it before. But what was the first organism to make it to space via the space travel that was able to do it for them? God. It wasn't like the dog. It wasn't a chimp. It wasn't a human being.
No, I know this, and I fail anyway.
it was before the chat comes in with it. It was a fruit fly.
There's a reason for that.
It's because fruit flies, despite being insects, have a lot of similar or organistic, if that's even the right word, similarities with humans. First, they sent up fruit flies, and then they sent up a dog, and then they sent up a chimpanzee, and then they sent up a human, and then they sent up a man, and then they sent up a human. By but I mean a woman.
A woman.
Yeah.
You see the
fruit
hierarchy.
flies thing.
You see the hierarchy thing. It's
Right.
It's fruit fly, dog, chimpanzee, man, woman.
Yeah. Well, and the first man that was sent up by Russia, and he died a horrible death. Like
Did
his
he?
huh?
I didn't even hear about that. Was that not Yuri Gagarin?
The first man that went up. Yeah, I want to make sure I got the right name. All right.
I feel like we're about.
Make sure I can pronounce this correctly. This is Vladimir Mikhailovich Komarov, Soviet cosmonaut, the first man known to have died during a space mission. Maybe he wasn't the first one that went up, but I was thinking he was the first one that went up. But his ship burned up on re-entry.
It would make perfect sense that a human would die in orbit before a human didn't die in orbit. And this is why, and this is one of the reasons so many people are convinced that humans didn't make it to the moon and survive before humans made it to the moon and then died.
Yeah. And it's like, this is part of the reason where, men suffering inequalities in countries characterized by medium and high levels of human development, like part of that is it's men who take those risks. It's men who do the heavy lifting. It's men who do the work, the labor, the walking, everything that leads to that. Like, if you look at there's video that's been colorized, I think on YouTube actually, of skyscrapers being built. I've gone through as much of it as I could find looking for my grandpa, because he used to work for Chicago Bridge and Iron. And he, like, I'm sitting next to one of his old welding masks right now. But, like, he built buildings in New York. He was from New York originally. He built buildings. He was sent to Mexico, and he built buildings there. He built buildings in Colorado. Did the welds in many, many places before he and Grandma settled down. And but a lot of those men, like, just walked around up on high I-beams, up on upper floors that were not made yet, that just had the framework of the building and nothing else, without any kind of safety gear. They didn't have anything that attached them to the, like, if they fell, they fell. And like, my grandpa was one of those men. And like, I think I've told the story of how he met my grandma. But Grandma was a nurse. Grandpa was injured. They dropped a this is gonna be horrific. Like, just fair warning. But they dropped a cement, like, barrel on him, like a drainage ditch liner, and crushed the bones in his leg. Crushed his ankle completely. Broke the bone several places all the way up to his hip. So he was in the hospital for quite some time. And he was in traction and everything. He was in a lot of pain. And his leg and his ankle were never fully the same again. And when he was retired and living with my parents, he always walked with a limp. But he continued to walk right up until he was about 92 years old, where he would walk downtown to go see people in the community that he liked to talk to and stuff. But he met my grandmother because she was his nurse. Today, he would be accused of sexual harassment by the other nurses. But after he healed up and everything, he asked her out, and they dated, and they got married, and that was that. But and my grandmother was beautiful.
All right, that does
yes.
it, Hannah. That does
my,
it.
My family has a rich history of misogyny.
Right. My paternal granddad was a fighter pilot in the Second World War, and he met my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, because she worked at Bletchley Park, where they invented the computer.
Awesome.
Right. So I win. Just this once, Hannah. I beat you in terms of anecdotes.
There you go. I think like our grandparents were romantic. I wish I had it in me to be that romantic, but I'm an asshole, so I don't. But it's such a cute story. They're both such cute stories, and the flirting that took place and everything, right? But Grandpa never would have met Grandma if he hadn't gotten hurt, and boy did he fucking get hurt. Like, that was a hellacious injury. And it could have been worse. He's lucky it hit his leg. Because it could have landed on any part of his body.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it was out of control when it fell.
I wonder how many future generations, like, my grandma met your grandpa fighting in Ukraine.
No.
Oh, no, wait. That was a war fought entirely by fucking drones.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like my other grandparents did not have such a good meeting story, and you guys probably will never hear it. but like, I've that's my family is like that. My uncle had a horrific injury, and it was again high level of human development. We're talking the ability to create all kinds of neat things out of molded rubber. So my uncle worked in a rubber processing plant, and he got his arm caught in a rubber press, and took it all the way up to his elbow, and crushed it to just a little under half an inch thick.
Ooh.
Completely destroyed his bones.
Jesus.
And then there was no way to lift it. They had to roll it back out to get his arm out of the rubber press. And so they had this neat advancement that they thought they were going to use in modern medicine during that time period. Was like the 70s. They wanted to say they didn't want to amputate his arm, which it should have been amputated. They wanted to save it by giving him metal bones. So they put aluminum bones in his arm, and he really was never able to use it. And it kind of pained him. He had problems where they had to replace those eventually with steel because they bent, which was really painful.
Yeah.
He ended up with all kinds of health problems.
Yeah, I was watching just as an offside. It's gonna be really quick. I was watching a show about like the different types of implants that they use, like for hip replacements and knee replacements, and how that can cause like other injuries, like mental disorders as well, because of the chemicals and the way they interact with the body. And it's scary. It's scary.
It's better to not have the injury in the first place if you can avoid it,
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. The people who are getting those injuries are men. And the people who are getting the experimental body parts are men. There are women that it happens to, but it's mostly men. My uncle on my dad's side had a metal plate in his head for my whole life, because it was there before I was born, and I believe that was from an injury. He was in Vietnam. He was in Vietnam before America was officially in Vietnam. Like, he couldn't even talk about the stuff he did for years and years after he came back. He was over there setting up communications and stuff. Again, the U.S. orchestrates wars before getting involved in them. But, like, my My uncle that got his arm caught in a rubber press was a Korean War veteran. My other uncle on that side of the family was also a Korean War veteran. Like men in technologically advanced countries, men in medicinally advanced countries, men in countries with an advanced military get discriminated against. Men are expected to serve. Men are expected to build. Men are expected to put up with the fact that they are the experiencers of 95% of workplace injuries. Men are the ones that transport goods. A huge portion of workplace injuries, workplace fatalities in particular, are roadway accidents, right? And slips, trips, and falls in construction environments. Like, those are two of the biggest causes of death in the workplace. Those are male-dominated fields, male-dominated accidents.
Yeah, and workplace fatalities overall are something like over 90%, something like
95% men.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's, these are things that we just allow in society. They're treated as, what do they call it when casualties aren't more than they expected? Acceptable casualties or something like that in the military. And that's basically what society does when we have a few thousand men a year die in the workplace, and a few hundred women, because progress must progress. So yeah, like then on top of that, you have a society that has a highly developed legal system and a highly developed social system, and it's run by women. Well, then when men have a grievance, their grievance gets ignored. Especially if that grievance is, my kids are being withheld from me, I can't have my relationship with my family that I'm supposed to have, and I can't mentor my children the way I'm supposed to mentor them as a father. He gets told, you're shit out of luck. When his grievance is, she lied about me, I didn't do the thing she said, and I shouldn't get punished for it, and my reputation should not be besmirched. Right? The answer is, you're shit out of luck. And even if he proves, look, here's solid evidence, she lied, she knew she was lying, I deserve recourse. Nope, you're shit out of luck. Right? That is how society treats men in developed countries. Right? I think men are more valued in less developed countries, partly because there's more visceral understanding among women, that men are the only thing standing between them and exposure to the elements, exposure to hardship, exposure to poverty and starvation. Where women in countries like the U.S. are spoiled rotten. There's a layer of government between women and the men that they are exploiting.
Yep.
Let's see. Although the type of gender bias seen in gender inequality research only becomes obvious when you understand that inequality is unequally measured, there are other more overt examples of how the term gender equality is badly abused. For example, when the European Central Bank recently stated on Twitter that equality is no longer enough.
What?
Many members of the public were forced to wonder if, being honest, enough was ever going to be enough. It seems that too many organizations today see men as a privileged patriarchy, and no amount of smashing them is ever going to achieve equality. And see, that's another thing. Like, our women's advocates will crow and yell about equality, right? And if you get into a situation where a resource, a benefit, a goodie, for lack of a better term, something that you want, now is experiencing 51 or more % female usage or representation in it, they'll say, oh, that's equality. If it's 60% or more, well, that's equality. If it's 80% women, well, that's equality. They don't do that when it's 51% men, 60% men, 80% men. No, then women are being discriminated against.
Exactly.
And that's basically what we see here.
Right.
Equality is no longer enough.
Well, then equality was never your goal.
Yeah.
God, just just being open and honest about who you are. I love it. Hey, just keep talking. Keep fucking talking, people. Just because you're just exactly explicitly exemplifying the things that we have been saying for the longest times, and you're just going for the gold. Okay.
You're under arrest, Lauren. That's communism in a nutshell.
Fine. It's fucking
infernalized misogyny.
Yeah. Fucking misogyny's my fucking ass. These people, man. Ugh.
It's just that feminists are so worried about us handmaidens getting handmaid's knee.
And this is something that I was gonna bring up when we were talking about the term incel before, and and I think the term for women that's kind of the equivalent is pick me, right? Because it's you must be thirsty for dick. That's why you're out here trying to find a man, right? That's the equivalent, because it's even women know that women can get sex if they want to, right? So it's not that they want to be chosen for sex. They want to be chosen for relationships and marriage, right?
Yeah.
That's what the real pick me thing is about. It's about wanting to be chosen and selected by a man for like forever, for these long-term goals, right? That or seem to be ridiculous for these. Why would you want a man? Why would you want a girl? You can be independent. Okay, all right. Let's see how long that independence lasts you.
Well,
It's the idea
being
that
independent rely on men's taxes to pay for programs they use.
Exactly. But don't bring that up, because you just hate women.
Mm-hmm.
You just hate women.
the idea that men are the one who pick the women has been. I mean, how can anyone stick by that paradigm ever for the last God knows how many 100 years? Men don't pick women. Women pick men.
Really, that's what we need to start answering too when they call you a pick me. Like, no. Yeah, I don't need to be picked. I picked him.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that is true. Like, I was head over heels for my husband the day I met him. And then I had my heart broken. And I thought it was going to be broken forever, because I had no idea that his wife was going to cheat and leave. Which, like, I still wouldn't have wanted him to go through that. Like, I would rather have a broken heart my whole life than him going through that. But it's a nice consolation prize that we got together. But I knew that, like, that just right then, and I don't think it hit him because he wasn't looking. He was married. And I don't think it hit him until his divorce was over. But
what any given relationship within the Honey Badger radio community will tell you is that if you're a man, you'd better hope you can find a woman who doesn't hate men and is still single. And what this demonstrates is how difficult it is for a man to find a woman who doesn't hate men and is still single, which is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Because despite how many women there are out there who don't hate men, none of them are single because they find a man very quickly, because it's remarkably easy to find a man who doesn't hate women.
Well, I would say this. It's not that. It's that if you don't hate men, you realize that there's plenty of them out there that are perfectly acceptable, like perfectly willing and just deserving of that kind of relationship, and but that's the attitude of these women out here, these feminist types of women. They disrespect. They don't care what men want. They don't care what men think. It's all about me, and I'm the prize, and I bring everything to the table, and you better match what I got or do better. You know what I mean? It's not about a compromise. It's not about being a team or building something with anyone else but themselves. It's all a self-serving act. So you'll find the simps who will capitulate to you and go along with you because they don't want to be alone. They want to find somebody. Well, she's better than this other chick with 3 baby daddies. This one only has 1.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
Well, no, the really tough part is, part of the reason that it's increasingly difficult to find grown women who are still single, who don't hate men, is because the women who are coming of age today have been raised by women who hate men and were raised by women who hate men.
Right.
Like there's a 3 or more generation single mom pattern now to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just, if her mom was a single mom, think twice. If her grandma was a single mom and her mom was a single mom and she's talking about wanting to be a mom, run. Run like hell. Run like the devil is on your heels with a knife and a fork, because that's basically the situation you're in.
Yep.
But yeah, so that situation is how do we deal with a legal system that caters to that? How do we deal with a legal system? That's why men are discriminated against in society today, because we have our whole government system is currently set up to cater to those women.
Mm-hmm.
And more women are seeing that and becoming those women.
Right.
So,
it was difficult. It was difficult for the boomers because so many boomers grew up without potential partners who grew up with fathers. Because the problem with the boomers is so many of them grew up with fathers who died in the Second World War. And I guess we could project this back into the First World War, but most of those people are dead right now. And I guess one has to wonder why the pervading government insists on creating so many wars, so that we have so many men who die in wars, and so few women who die in wars.
Yeah.
So that we can keep perpetuating this system of children whose fathers died in the war and whose mothers did not. So that they can also grow up in single mother families. Single mother families who are single mother families for legitimate reasons. So that we can compare those with single mother families who are single mother families for non-legitimate reasons, so that we can compare them all as the same thing, and we can say, well, you only exist without a father for the same reason that other families grow up without a father for legitimate reasons. It's nothing to do with the fact that I fucking slung this pussy about and I didn't give a shit about the father.
No.
And
Well, and you see women who are in circumstances beyond their control versus women who just carelessly created a poverty situation for their child. Like you're looking at women who will be dedicated to try to give their kid the most normal life possible, keep them connected to the family, and even though dad isn't there, at least make sure that the kid sees this is what the grown men in our family are like. You know, and these are the grown men in our family that mom trusts and relies on, you know, for advice and for help. And then the other one hates men, talks about how trash they are, you know, to her, and you know, usually has a different one every month in the house, brings home the worst possible examples of men, and then, you know, when she gets drunk or stoned or angry or, you know, on her period or whatever, turns around and yells at her son that you're just like your father. Well, who is my father? How the hell should I know? And that's if toxic masculinity exists, that's how it's created. Right there.
And you need to go off to a third world country where you fight for the rights of some other cunt. And this is how it's perpetuated.
Mm-hmm.
Like 20 years ago, it was you go off and fight for Iraq, even though it has nothing to do with our shit. And nowadays, it's you go off and fight for Ukraine, even though that has nothing to do with our shit. And so on and so forth.
Go fight.
Yep.
Just go fight.
I'll leave it there in case this stream gets taken down.
But meanwhile, we'll finish the article because this does you know have an interesting note we should leave on. But perhaps the graph above shows that despite the prevailing negativity about men and masculinity, a large number of people are starting to overcome their unconscious biases against men. In theory, psychologists and social scientists should be ideally placed to help people overcome their biases, but psychology today is limited in regards to men by the quality of the theory, research, and training available, which is feminist guided, by the way. There are signs of improvement, but as things stand today, academia needs to be much more scientific and humanitarian. When there's typos, it's really hard because I assume I'm having a dyslexic moment. When it comes to understanding men, helping to overcome human suffering must include male suffering. And it is something that must include all of us, supported by and not hindered by the legal system, politics, and the media, and other institutions that influence the way we think about people. And that is the article. So like I'm in agreement on this, that you know there is some. It looks like to me that there is some evidence that the Overton window on this is moving toward a wider spread degree of compassion for men, where people who might have been indifferent previously now are looking at men's situation going, fuck, that sucks, and it shouldn't be that way, right? And that's a very important step, because that determines what politicians can get away with and what politicians can feel obligated to do. If the Overton window is at men are human and we have to treat them like human beings, and politicians don't go along with that, they lose their jobs. They get voted out of office.
It's worth pointing out that the likes of Adolf Hitler, at least Hitler himself, his philosophy was that the penance that women pay towards being a human being is that they give birth. And it is quite difficult for a human woman to give birth because of how big the heads are and so forth. But his idea was that the equivalent penance that men pay is that they fight wars.
It never occurred to him that men head up the household where the children grow up.
Exactly. And throughout the last century, there have been many scientific advancements that make it easier for women to give birth. And that maybe there can be political advancements that make it so that men don't have to fight wars. Yeah. And that would be nice. Let us consider the fact that there have been scientific advancements to make it easier for women to give birth. But if governments decide that men need to fight wars, I mean, what has been put in place to prevent them from doing so?
Yeah, this is something that is in deep need of reform. And honestly, like this is a big part of the reason why I am for a genderless draft. I don't think that the power addicts in Washington will give up the power of forcing poor and middle-class men to go fight wars in foreign countries that don't actually mean anything to their folks at home. The war, not the country. Like, they won't give that up willingly.
Nope.
Like, one president attempted to make that happen, and the very next president reversed it. So that was it. We didn't hear about it again. Right? So the only thing that we can do is draft women. Like have women sign up for selective service. And if there's going to be a draft, both sexes are eligible for it. And everyone in the United States is at risk of having their daughters drafted just as much as they are of having their sons drafted. And that would make politicians have to think twice about exploiting the youth that way, because people would not tolerate sending women, and that would protect men from being sent.
Or they could just define any man who identifies as a woman, and any woman who identifies as a man. That would be so much easier, wouldn't it?
Yeah. But I bet the draft wouldn't last very long if they added women to it. I bet selective service would suddenly become unimportant. Like, why do we need bodies? Why do we need boots on the ground? We got technology. We can send in machines. Right?
Mm-hmm. Just like those Fight for 15 workers and all those McDonald's workers who got their $15 an hour, they were soon replaced by the machines.
Yep.
Or just like all those drones. Like wars have been fought by drones ever since the Obama regime. Does that mean anything? I don't know.
We just change it so that, all it is a bunch of drones. Big drones, little drones, medium drones. And in order to serve in the military, you have to be a decent gamer. You got to be able to pilot the drone from a distance.
Can I get a side of fries with my drone?
Yes.
I mean, gamer just means misogynist, doesn't it?
Gotta have your Doritos and your Mountain Dew and your sunglasses while you're piloting your drone. That's the rules. But you're not allowed to wear the sunglasses unless you get a confirmed kill. And with that, I think I better get into the super chats because we're getting into the weeds. But yeah, that's that is the situation that we're in. Maybe if we can gain, more and more compassion for men in the future, we won't need that. We can just get that selective service eliminated. Go to an all voluntary military, like and people aren't going to believe this, but it was Richard Nixon that wanted to do that. All voluntary. And after he resigned, Ford honored that wish by eliminating the draft, eliminating the selective service sign-up requirement. And it was eliminated for like 4 or 5 years, and then it was reinstated by Carter.
Remember when one journalist by the name of David Frost was able to infiltrate Richard Nixon and like single-handedly get him to cry about the Watergate scandal? Imagine if that was possible with Donald Trump. Evidently, it's not. Like 1 million journalists are not able to go in and make him confess to the crimes that they thought he was guilty of.
I'm not even sure about the when Nixon cried, did he talk about why they really were breaking into that hotel?
I'm starting to wonder, given given all the shit we've been revealed about how the left-wing media is full of shit, I'm starting to wonder if Nixon was even guilty of all the shit they accused him of.
He was.
He probably was, but all this has left me wondering. And, So
what people may not know was the break-in at the Watergate Hotel. They always said it was, opposition research. No, that's kind of bullshit. It was to see what opposition research they had, and in particular, opposition research on what Nixon did before he was voted into office. Because he went over to negotiate with the opposing side in the Vietnam War. Hold off. Wait until I get into office, I'll give you a better deal. And that there was, I guess, a document, a letter, I can't remember, that I believe Nixon thought LBJ had it. And that's what they were looking for. They were looking for evidence that he had it, or they were looking for evidence that they knew about it and could use it against Nixon in the next election. And
in case anyone's wondering if we'll ever get video footage of Joe Biden crying about all the bullshit he did, it's not going to happen. As soon as the journalist in question poses the biggest question they can ask, there's just going to be a dozen White House operatives going, no, stop right now, this interview is over.
Yeah. But yeah, what I just described is a violation of the law that one of the guys that was convicted, Flint, was convicted of violating, I believe, Hatch Act. I think I've got that right. Where you're not supposed to go over and act as in a position of federal authority until you actually have that position. If you do, you're in violation, right? Well, he already had that position. He was convicted of violating a law he didn't violate, but Nixon did violate that law. He wasn't elected yet. So there's that. He interfered in the Vietnam War. That's pretty bad shit. So yeah,
it's amazing how many former vice presidents went on to become presidents. Nixon was one of them. Bush was one of them.
Yeah.
And Biden was one of them. It's kind of you really need to watch out for
Well,
former vice presidents who became presidents.
Nixon was a one-term. Bush was a one-term. So let's see. Biden hopefully will also be a one-term.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine him trying to run in this next election. But really, honestly, who else do they have? Who does anybody have? Like, forget about Biden. I don't even think he's going to make it to the election, much less through it and through another term. But I cannot see them handing the torch over to Kamala. It's just
Yeah, that's
no.
scary. I mean, can you imagine? Now, I like various theories about 9/11 notwithstanding, right? Just imagine for a moment. Kamala Harris is in there reading a book to a bunch of school children, and her aide comes in and whispers into her ear that an act of war has been committed against the United States on U.S. soil, and 3,000 people are suspected to be dead. And her first response is to cackle like the Wicked Witch of the West. Oh, you're serious? That really happened? Oh my God! You know, the kids would be in a panic immediately. The media would be in a panic. No, August Lyon, I do not want to be president. Not happening.
Besides, you get secret security coverage for the rest of your life. Come on.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
you realize how much privacy you have to give up?
You say that, but it would only work if Kamala had no power whatsoever, and she was just a face employed to be president, despite having no power. Now, does that remind you of anyone?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, imagine if Biden was suddenly informed of an emergency of that kind of emergence.
That would be the most embarrassing scene, because the guy would lean over and whisper into his ear, and Biden would stage whisper back to him, and everyone would hear it.
No, he would be like, "Yeah, I know. I was told about this."
Yeah.
Like
no,
2 fucking hours ago. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Because he can't help himself.
Yeah. Gee, Pete's. You know, I had thought about making some parody videos of, Biden versus Bernie debating, and just taking their actual speech and putting it to Grandpa Simpson. Biden was going to be Grandpa Simpson, and I can't remember who I was going to do with Bernie Sanders. But in any case, I realized Grandpa Simpson was too charitable for Biden. And then I kind of stopped because I didn't know any characters I could use that, like, maybe if there was a character that's a cross between Grandpa Simpson and Pinky from Pinky and the Brain, but Biden himself is such a parody of himself that you can't parody that.
Yeah, Biden is as stupid as Pinky, but as contemptuous as Brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And as senile as Grandpa Simpson.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of heartbreaking. Like, I mean, it's not that I had any great respect for him before. I mean, you guys all know there's no love lost there. After I read about the crime bill and the Violence Against Women Act, and in particular, like in the 90s when the Violence Against Women Act was being passed, I read more about that than I did the crime bill. There seemed to be more written about that, and there was more discussion about that among the women I was hanging out with at the time. And I kept saying it was going to be a disaster because, like, we already had laws that did everything that everybody was saying. We need a new law to do this. And there was something they weren't telling us, right? There was some other purpose behind it that they weren't telling us, because there was no other reason that they would pass a law to do what they already had a law doing. And, you know, soon enough, like, it was only a year after, actually not even a full year after the law passed, when local police departments in my area started doing stupid shit. Sorry, guys. That's my phone. Anyway, where was I? And I knew it was because of that law over time. And the more I discovered, the more I realized, like, this is it. This is federally mandated, and that was enough. Like, I was never going to be able to have any respect for Joe Biden, because he basically created a situation that was impossible for abused men, and very advantageous to false accusers. Like, that's what got me involved in men's rights. Like,
and for the record, FBI's asshole, Joe Biden is a hero and a saint and America's only hope against this rapist who is Donald Trump. Please let me into the USA as of tomorrow, when it might actually be an option.
Please. Please. Pretty please. Would be nice.
Oh, sometimes I love having two jobs. Guys, I seriously turned down, I could have worked a shift this evening because, like, somebody called off. And I turned it down because I'm doing this, and I explained, I am working. You know, like, I go into work at 3 o'clock tomorrow, and I just got asked to take a shift tonight. Like, she was calling to ask me to work tonight. And I'm like, sitting there, like, I'm at my other job right now.
Yeah.
You know, this would be basically working until 6:30 in the morning and then coming back in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There's just no way. Like, I didn't sleep today so that I would sleep tonight so that I would be up in the morning. Like,
right.
I think this is the third time today I have explained that I am at my other job today, and this is the only day of the week that I'm at my other job, and this is the day that I get asked to cover the most.
Mm-hmm.
Your taxes are going to be interesting as of April the 15th.
Oh, they always are. They always are. Like, my taxes are always interesting. Actually, we had to create a business name and incorporate as a limited liability corporation so that I could pay taxes on my honey badger income, because the U.S. government demands that I do that, but gives me no way to do it as an independent contractor that isn't a business owner. So legally, I'm a business owner now. Like, it's crazy. So, but yeah.
Wow.
But anyway.
Imagine a world without government.
Yeah. I have daydreamed about that, but, you know.
Everybody smile on your brother. Everybody get together. Try to love one another right now.
Right? Meow.
Boy, would that be nice. But that's not what we got, so we got to work with what we got. So, anyway, let me find where I saved the super chats, because I knew it was going to scroll past them. Here we are. We got 2 super chats that I was able to see. I didn't see any other ones before or after that. So, the first one was from Senior Sticks. And it gave us $2 USD and said, idea for HBR buddy Hannah, Karen, Allison, Lauren. Like, you mean like the thumbs up buddy with a big smile? Like, I could do that. Just, you know, don't look at my teeth. Albert Nader Retro gave us $5.50 Canadian and said, Lauren, did you get a chance to finish reading it? And can you pass it on to Hannah, Brian, and Dr. Mike? Like, just be aware, Albert, that I have no extra time to read right now. Like, this thing that happened tonight with the shifts is... I picked up that extra shift tomorrow. I picked up an extra shift this past Monday, and I go in early on Saturday, and I picked up extra shifts next weekend and the week after. So, like, I picked up a buttload of extra shifts because we just lost both of our second shifters. Yeah. I mean, it's like, there's a thing going on between the baby boomer administrator generation, like, down into Gen X, and the Zoomer generation's idea of how work should be, and it's very hard to keep Zoomers employed. And there's a lot of millennials or Gen Y and Gen X that are catching that fever. So yeah, I'm working because there is nobody else to do the job. Honestly, like, I'm kind of the last resort, but like, it's not that there's not other workers, it's that everybody is picking up extra hours, and that's everybody I know that's working is talking about that happening in their workplace too. So something's gonna have to change. I think the way that scheduling is done and the way that work is done is gonna have to change a little bit. And if the younger generation wants to be able to afford to live, they're gonna have to change the way they work too. It's gonna have to be a meeting halfway. But in any case, that's the way it is. Albatross gave us $5 USD and said, here's a couple of bucks for working 2 jobs, a heart, peace sign, and dove. And I thank you very much for that. And I will probably do that for as long as I can do it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an addiction there. But let's see now if my page will load. Did we have any? We did not have any Rumble rants that were paid. And I don't see any that were... Yeah. Yeah, I don't see any that really need to be read out. So we go to the Super Chows. If I can get Discord to work. And find the Super Chow channel. And there we go. Super Chows. I have to open and get the channel to open. I do this on my desktop computer, and it's like super slow with Discord for some reason. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 260, honey for the badgers. Isn't it interesting that chivalry comes from an aristocratic sense of entitlement, and the first wave feminists were all upper class, elite, and entitled? And isn't it interesting that the elite like to use weaponized divisive ideology to keep the masses in check? Well, it's in particular like romantic chivalry, because there's chivalry that was pre-aristocratic gynocentrism that was not like that. It wasn't about women. It was about honor and respect, and like a very different system. But
chivalry literally translates as horsage.
Yeah. It was about like a knight. A knight.
It translates to various different European civilizations into men who rode horses.
Yeah.
But somehow, beyond the realm of language, it translated into men who ride horses and fight for women's honor.
Honor and regard. But it on the way there, it became, men who ride horses and treat each other with a professional respect and professional courtesy, and take care of help
and treat women as goddesses.
Well,
let's say.
Help the weak, help the sick, protect the land, and things like that. It wasn't about women. And then along came the aristocracy and was like, well, it needs to be more. We need more women in this. More women in chivalry. We need to be the target. Forget about the elderly and the sick and the infirm. Just women.
If you ever look at portraits of aristocratic men in those days, they tended to wear quite gaudy outfits, which included miniskirts and gaudy tights.
Mm-hmm.
One of these days I'm gonna do a video about this. I might even just write a fucking blog and send it off to someone influential like Lotus Eaters and point out to everyone that the way upper class men used to dress in medieval times is the way troons dress nowadays.
You should get Allison in on that, because I think she did a research paper on that.
Yeah, we've been trying to get. All of us have been trying to get this across for fucking 10 years. That it's how upper class people dress, and then one day, it was just decided that women would dress like this, and then it was just like women are just indistinguishable from upper class people, and now men can't dress like this because men don't dress like upper class people, and that it's so complicated. It's complicated, but it's hard to get it across. I'm going to figure it out one day, and it's going to be along the lines of that joke involving the aristocrats. The aristocrats joke. I'm going to do that. One of these days, I'm going to fucking do that.
Alrighty. Well, then we got Michael Emmerich Winberg gave us $5 and said, in Islamic countries, the police will kill a woman for not wearing a hijab. Sparking countrywide protests in which the majority of the casualties and arrests are men, for some reason. But one thing is true, they won't kill men for not wearing the appropriate garb. The reason for that is that men know better than to do so, and nobody will protect them or fight for them if they're killed.
Right.
Men would have to not wear the appropriate garb in order to be killed for it. But they will throw men off buildings for holding hands in public. But they don't do that to women. Yeah, that's like I said, there's definitely a pretty high degree of gynocentrism in Islam. You just have to know what you're looking for. Teflon Soul gave us $10 and said, just a dono and thanks for the good show. Thanks for the donation.
Thanks for not letting us die on that hill that we were going to die on ages ago.
Yeah. Well, I'm still dying on it, but I decided not to. I'm going to spend the whole time living.
Yeah.
But with that, I think we got them all. And yeah, flamboyant men. Night Motorcyclist says flamboyant men in Islam are killed. And Shaman King XYZ says they are called rooftop tours. Jeez. It's like helicopter rides, but it's not funny. But yeah. With that, I'm going to thank everybody for listening to. This was a great article, and we made a nice double sausage out of it.
Yeah.
And thanks to my two co-hosts for sticking out. This is kind of a long sausage, but I don't leave for work tonight. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And of course, thanks to Dr. John Berry for writing this great article.
Yes.
Good night, all.
Good night, y'all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.